Hey guys, it's Brandon. I'm going to go over a game tonight. This is the second game in the series that we're doing on the Master game. And this game was played in 1999 by none other than Gavriel, aka King's Crusher, playing white. And this is a wonderful attacking game. And I thought I'd show it as sort of a tribute to King's Crusher, who had a great effect on me getting back into chess 6 months ago or so when I discovered his channel. And I assume most of you know, watching this will know who Casey is, but for those of you who don't, his excellent chess channel is at youtube.com, user and King's Crusher. So I'm going to try to go through as many important variations as I can, but I only have 15 minutes to show the game. So like I said, this was played in 1999, and Casey was playing Colin Crouch, who I believe now is an IM. At the time was rated 2346, and Casey's rating on chessgames.com wasn't shown for this game, but I imagine it was somewhere between the high 2100s and somewhere in the, or maybe somewhere in the 2200s. And so we'll get into it. Casey was white, and from the beginning surprised me a little bit by playing d4. I thought mostly he's an e4 player, but this game was 12 years ago, so perhaps his repertoire has changed a little bit. Knight f6 comes in from Crouch, c4, and now c5. This marks the Benoni defense, which is Hebrew for son of sorrow, and is sort of an aggressive defense by black. d5, and here oftentimes you see e6. This is the modern Benoni, where after knight c3, e takes d5, c takes d5, g6, e4. White tries to take advantage of his pawns in the center, his majority in the center, and black tries to take advantage of his majority on the queen side. You know, pushing these pawns, these arrows are diagonals, pushing these pawns down the queen side and trying to create play there for himself. But that's not what we see here. You should note that this there was a great game played in 1972, Fischer-Spassky, the third game of the World Championship that they played, which was the first game that Fischer won against Spassky in his career, and turned the tides of that match. But in any case, in this game, after d5, we saw e5, which is the Czech Benoni, which is known as a little bit more solid, but a little bit more passive than the modern Benoni for black. So knight to c3, d6, e4. Note here that the center is completely blocked in by these pawns, and so there's going to be no action in the center until the sides muster up either one of these advances, b5, f4, b4, f4, b5, f5, to break things open. So bishop e7 came in, development, g3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop, castles, h4. I don't know about the theory of this, but it seems particularly aggressive and sort of suits Casey's style, where he'll try to get these pawns rolling on the king side later on in the game, and he will to great effect. Knight to e8, just preparing this maneuver, possibly to get the knight onto the queen side, where black's counterplay will be. Bishop h3. Now this is a good strategic idea, creating tension between these two bishops, and he's trying to trade off his bad bishop, technically, because it's blocked in by this pawns. Casey's bad bishop is his white bishop, and this is his black's good bishop. Black's bad bishop is his dark square bishop, which is blocked in by his own center pawns. So makes strategic sense. And then hopefully maybe Casey will try to play on these light squares on the king side down the road, which will be weakened without this defender for black. So knight to c7, just bringing that knight over. Queen to d3, knight to d7, knight to e2. I think this knight came to e2 as opposed to the natural square f3, because from there on f3 it has no real squares to go to in the center, and it would be blocking in this f4 advance. So he just moves it here so he can watch his friend over there and maintain the option of this f4 advance later on in the game. b5, playing this as a pawn sacrifice, because this pawn is only covered by the knight, so if pawn takes, knight can't recapture. So c takes b5. Now a6 comes in. This is something we see in the Benoni a lot, usually a few moves earlier in the game. It's known as the Banco Gambit, where the idea for white is if b takes a6, bishop takes a6, and this bishop becomes powerful on this diagonal, supported by this rook here on a8. But Casey doesn't want anything to do with that. After a6, he just plays b6, giving the pawn back right away to knight to b6. Bishop takes c8, So now, finally, KC exchanges his bishop. Queen takes c8, getting rid of his bad bishop and getting rid of black's good bishop. So a4, possibly coming to a5, just looking to harass this knight here, excuse me, which is then prevented with a5. Now g4. Now this is a pawn sacrifice. This queen can come in and grab g4. But I think that KC's plan was maybe even to sacrifice 2 pawns. If queen takes g4, then you probably see something like rook coming to the g-file, just coming down onto this g-file here. And then maybe castling queenside and bringing this rook over here to h1 and bearing down on the king this way. So after g4, Colin Crouch declines the pawn sacrifice and just plays knight to a6, preparing to come into c4, which would hit the queen, and would be unable to be kicked from that square because there's no pawns that are on the a file or the c file that can kick it out of there. Queen to g3, lining up the queen against the king. Looks very aggressive. Notice that we're on move 16 and he still hasn't castled. King's Crusher. Knight to b4, threatening this fork on c2 here. If knight comes in here, check. That would win at least the exchange there, and I'm not sure the knight could be stopped from getting back out. So it would probably win a rook. So KC says, all right, I'll get my king into safety and stop any of this fork nonsense from coming in. Queen to a6, transferring the queen onto this nice light square diagonal and onto the queen side, where he hopes to find, I think Crouch hopes to find some counterplay. Now KC brings open the attack. f4, just preparing an assault on the center and onto the king side. E takes f4, bishop takes f4, getting the bishop into the game. Rook to a to d8, and you'll excuse me for going quickly through these moves, but I'm trying to get to the good stuff, and there's only so much time allowed on YouTube videos. Rook a to d1, preparing this maneuver to set up the queen and rook battery. Knight takes a4. That's the other thing about this rook a to d1 move. That a pawn was just sacrificed in the hope of getting this rook in. And now, of course, I think knight takes a4 is possible, but it may have been strategically wrong because after knight takes a4, queen takes e2, removing this knight now no longer defending that knight. And this queen would be in a very annoying spot, preventing many of these maneuvers from coming in and just sort of sitting dangerously around the king. So KC avoids that and just plays rook to d2, preparing this maneuver to come in here. And knight b6 was played. Knight to c1, making way for this rook to come in here, as we've said. So knight to c4, repositioning the knight, just getting him in on the queen side. Rook comes over to g2. Now this queen and this rook are batteried on this g7 square, and it's pretty obvious that KC's just going for the all-out attack here. Bishop to f6, just preparing to bring this bishop to d5 and try to trade off some attacking pieces. Rook to e1, just getting more pieces into the attack. Now bishop to e5, pinning this bishop and offering a trade of bishops, and that's usually a good idea when you're being attacked like this, and it's quite obvious that Crouch is being attacked, that you want to trade as many pieces as possible. KC says, go for it, take it, I'm going to break you open with g5. Bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, knight to e5. Now this knight is hoping to come here to g7, sort of block the view of the rook and the queens on this file, and attack the queen in the meantime. Rook to e3, just preparing to get another rook onto this file. f6, hoping to free this square here, I think, for the rook to guard g7. If pawn takes, then pawn can't take back because it's pinned, so rook takes would be forced, and that's indeed what we see. KC plays g takes f6. Now is Zug, knight g6, blocking this the view of this rook and later on the queen of the g7 point, and also hitting the queen. But KC calmly plays queen to g4. So this attack is coming. Rook grabs the pawn, knight to e2, preparing a nice little maneuver of the knight to g3 to f5, just hitting this g7 point. And as Kasparov was famous for saying, if a knight is sitting on f5, it's probably danger time. So rook back to h7, like I said, just guarding the g7 square. Knight g3, bringing another rook into the attack, and knight to f5, again hitting this g7 point. King to h8, just trying to get out of any pins along this file here. Rook e to g3. Now we see this tripling of the heavy pieces, like the Alekine's gun almost, pointing down on this g7 square in addition to the knight. Knight to e7, just trying to trade these knights off. We see queen to g5 from KC. Knight takes f5. E takes f5, just bringing another piece, another pawn into the attack. Queen to c4. I think the idea for Crouch here was to get this queen onto d4 with check, and then hopefully bring the queen back here in the defense and offer a queen trade. KC says, I'm not having any of that. Rook to g4, blocking that check, attacking the queen, making the queen move. And the queen has to go to this square on b3 where it's doing virtually nothing. So f6 from KC, just bringing the attack. And now a mistake from Crouch. Plays g6, weakening these dark squares severely, and allowing this pawn to be sort of almost an attacking unit on the king side, as Kasparov would say. h5, just bringing in the attack. This pawn is immune from being captured, because if g takes h5, then queen to g8, rook g8, rook g8 is mate. So that pawn can't be captured. h5, rook to g8, just desperately trying to get the rooks and maneuver them into the defense here. Calmly, queen to h6, getting in on those dark squares. Rook takes f6, trying to get rid of as many attacking units as possible, but h takes g6. And of course this pawn is pinned, so it can't go anywhere. Rook to g7, just trying to defend the h7 square. Now we see a beautiful tactical move combination come in from KC. Rook to e4, which is followed by rook to f8. Rook to e7. This rook now can't be taken, because if it is, queen comes into f8, that's mate. So after rook to e7, we just see rook to g8, trying to double up on this pawn, trying to hold on desperately, but it's not enough. The king is trapped, and KC finds the move, which makes Crouch resign. Queen takes h7, which is a forced mate in 2, where after rook takes queen, rook takes rook, and it's checkmate. King can't get anywhere. It's blocked in by this rook, and this pawn is protecting the rook. So, wonderful attacking game from KC, just all out went for the king, and came through in beautiful style. And I think the key for him was the fact that this queen was never able to get back to the king side on the defense of Black's king. It just sort of sat over here as a spectator piece for most of the game. So, hope you guys enjoyed that game, and hope it was instructive for you. It certainly was for me. And we'll see you next time.